Okay. Right. Well, I'm going to try and defend my view of a particular perspective on Europeanization in education, and I don't speak Portuguese, but I do hear a lot of Portuguese. So the particular angle, just today, I'm not speaking about all European education and European Union policies. The particular angle I want to take is what I've called here the European understory. And it means understory is like the undergrowth. It's not the tall trees, it's the work at the bottom of the forest. And that's the kind of thing that I'm interested in. And it's the area that I became more and more aware of over the years as this involved in ERA, involved in thematic networks in Europe, involved in framework projects, the big framework projects, working with a number of colleagues who are in this room or have passed through. I became aware of another kind of actor in Europe. Not the ones who appear on television, not the ones who were always explaining exactly what's happening in Europe, but the people that I was meeting in universities or schools, and they were revealing a different way of thinking about Europeanization, which for me, at least for this paper, is not about the direct acts of the European Commission. It's not the policies that the European Union wants to act in education. It's the actors themselves and who they are, where they come from. I was drawn to this when a few years ago I was sitting with a person I didn't know in Bristol in southwest England in university, and she said that you'd be interested. She said, I've just come back from Brussels. And I said, yeah, okay. And what were you doing in Brussels? Oh, she said, it was nothing much. We were just sitting together, some professors across Europe, sitting together and talking about our work. And I said, well, what is your work exactly? She said, I'm very interested in school effectiveness, school performance, and I was looking to be able to meet with some of the key professors and researchers in this area. And I said, was it just a conversation then? And she said, no, because the Commission wanted us to give them some information about. Well, as this conversation continued, I realized this was no innocent professor abroad in Brussels. This was somebody who was actually working, even if she didn't know it, working to create the European space, the policy space, the practical space in which we operate. What they were doing was creating the benchmarks and indicators for school performance. A document, one of the many that came out, I suppose, as part of the Lisbon process. That famous city in Portugal, which has terrorized European education for the last few years, the Lisbon process. And then I was thinking, well, if she doesn't know she's doing this, do other people who are busy working, creating, building the infrastructure of this Europe, are they aware of it? And so this is what started me on this. So it's an ecological metaphor. It may not even be a good one, but in the dark parts of the forest, things move, and I was interested in who's doing the moving and what they're building. And the key terms would be the experts and the professionals. And it can be also the associations and the networks. It's a natural place that they exist in, but it's also a constructed place because often they exist together, working together, not just because of their interests, but sometimes because of additional funding in some ways. Additional funding. before our budget airlines started running across Europe, in the early days, we used to call these meetings lost weekends in Europe, because you could only afford to go to these meetings on the weekends. And then you would go to a room and you would never see a city or a country or a place, and then you would leave the room and go back to the airport. So what are the lost weekends? Well, the scholars and expert activities and the interchanges, often supported by direct funding, by consultancies, by research and professional programs, by projects. And I think, and I've argued before in a paper called Soft Governance, that how the European Union works is to embrace us. And a lot of academics find the embrace very, very encouraging, very welcoming. The notion of the embrace, and even soft governance, I think, comes from colleagues that I kept speaking about, who say, you know, it's only when I come to the European Association or these meetings that I really feel that we can work and talk together. You know, in my own country, it's hopeless and I can't find people, or the government never wants to speak to us, or the rectors of the universities, perhaps. And so there was an exclusion developed, and there's all kinds of public-private partnerships, agencies, associations, market relations, in which a complex European Union, or at least a complex Europe, is working today. Because it's not all the European Union, there's all kinds of technologies that allow us to work with people in ways that it did not allow us to do before. I still have a folder in my office of airmail letters that came back to me from Madison in New York in the 1980s, which I saved because it was very rare to get an American letter. And it was very rare, and I needed to think about it later. Well, I mean, today, emails are flying hugely, and that's just emails, and other parts of the world I don't know much about, but I know that we are in constant touch with each other, or can be. Now, what I felt the Embrace was doing was it was drawing in actors willingly into a space in which they could be influenced, shaped, constructed, perhaps is the word. So it wasn't a direct contract, it wasn't employment, it's not civil service, it's not being a public servant. It's a kind of a way that you become drawn in. And in the two associations I'm going to be making reference to, I want to use them as examples of this. Of course, there's many other ways of working in Europe, and we are constructing Europe all the time. The very fact that I can speak to you here in what is for me a foreign country is a sign of how things are working. The fact that Sisyphus is produced in English, which is both a good and a bad thing, is a sign of how things are changing and working. So it's not just what the Commission wants, it's how things that we also want. We're busy making something. When the experts meet, it seems to me, and we're not all experts, but some are experts, they're busy classifying, they're analysing data, they're creating standards, they're accumulating knowledge about problems in systems. I had a conversation with a man that I'd met, head of a policy unit that I'd met in Brussels in maybe 1998, 99, and he was in a very dark, old, dirty building in the Rue de la Loi in Brussels. And I visited him again 9 years later, and he was on the 7th floor of a beautiful new blue skyscraper. And when the first time I'd seen him, he said, yes, education, here's a book, you might find this interesting. The next time he's talking from the great Panopticon, and he's talking about special education in Flanders, the cost of inspection in Britain. He saw everything. And that was a huge change, the change from Lisbon, the change from Bologna, the change of using experts, of academics, of people constructing indicators and benchmarks. When I'd first gone to Brussels, the second time in the association, I'd said to my colleagues, look, we've got to give them an idea. It's no good just saying, please give us money. We have to give them an idea. So I said, why don't we talk about the European education research space? And people said, don't be stupid, there isn't a European education. I said, no, but we give them an idea. This is what, this is what Coca-Cola does. We can do this. So we gave them this idea, which of course they ignored. But I think that the idea of the European education space started to arrive all over. Universities would talk about the higher education space. Adult education would talk about the lifelong learning space. So by the use of the word space, we were talking about an imaginary. But I think that we were also constructing this imaginary. The construction came through standardized objects, the data, professional knowledge. And this is what my paper's about, but the PowerPoint is just a very light touch on this. So I think that the actors as constructing and transforming, not just transmitting things, they're mediating, translating. And it's a sophisticated thing that they're doing. All this has been published in the last few years because we're becoming, many of us, aware of how these things are constructed. Something like the European qualifications framework, which I've always avoided because I just thought it was so boring, turns out to be a really substantial way of knitting together European national qualifications. And it's not just taking them as fixed, it's changing them as it joins them. National data is exactly the same. My colleague in Denmark told me that in the year 2000, Denmark moved towards European categories of data collection. He said in that moment we could be compared with every European country, but we can no longer be compared with our past. The categories had altered. So I'm taking two associations now, and the first one is ERA, the second one is SIKI, the Conference of Inspectors. Both of them I've written about. The first one I've been involved in, the second one is a project at the moment. So you can see this, it's quite simple really. It was founded in Strasbourg in 1994. A number of different associations, especially the Dutch, perhaps the British and the Nordic Association, came together. The Dutch were inspired by the signing of the Maastricht Treaty and its introduction of education into European policy. I don't think that affected any meeting they had. I think it just was their inspiration. They thought, as we all do, each time, my country is at the centre of things. But it got money for the meeting by saying that they got money from the EU by saying they would do a feasibility study on the state of education research in Europe. Quite an interesting study, but mainly interviews with important European professors, who all gave a different answer, of course. So that was how the organisation started in some ways. It was mutual, professional, interested, thinking about what we should do together. We would say low-key. They felt that every strong association should help the weak associations, wherever they were in Europe. They should be invited in, they should be helped. That Europe was moving from a period of uncoordinated to coordinated, coherent activity and research. There was a need for an umbrella organisation, which is a very loose term, an umbrella, that would join associations. And although I never saw any mention of these two organisations again, the Council of Europe and the OECD said, please, we would like a single organisation. If they did, they then ignored us because I never heard them appear and knock on the door again. And we felt then that Eastern Europe, the accession countries, needed assistance. And ERA set as its task to create a journal, to train researchers, organise cross-national research projects. It was very idealistic. It just wanted people just wanted to help, and talk and work with each other. Okay, in 1996, there was 12 national associations on the ERA Council. Last year there was 35. One or two regions, but in effect these are all countries. And the new countries that are joining are places like Belarus, Turkey, I think Armenia. But then it becomes more complicated because some states have more than one national association, like Belgium, certainly like Spain. But 35 associations, in theory, can sit around a big table now and represent Europe. In the first Easter, the first conference, in '96, there were 600 academics. Last year in Cadiz, how do you say it? Cadiz, anyway, over there. 2,700 academics came. It's getting bigger. I hope, actually, it doesn't grow much bigger, because then it would be like America, like Babel, just craziness. Okay, so what ERA tried to do, one of the things it tried to do was to try and use this notion of space and get money for research infrastructure. It was very concerned that we couldn't speak to each other in terms of our traditions, our publications, that we couldn't talk about our data, that the librarians in particular who worked in the association wanted to start this particular network, Perry. And it worked for a few years. It was bringing citation in together. It was a kind of really good resource for people. But as the money goes with the European project, it comes, it goes. When it goes, the project goes. So a multilingual, freely accessible catalogue stopped. The next one was ERQI, which was a more ambitious attempt from Hamburg to provide a new system of scientific quality evaluation to break the power of the Web of Science and ISI. And luckily, I avoided being a member of that project. And I only heard the huge problems it had. But anyway, it was a deliberate, serious attempt to do something. Many of the experts working inside ERA have been involved with benchmarking indicators, assessment in particular, school effectiveness, so they're engaged. Now looking now at the standing conference, it has some similarities. In '95, 6 European inspectorates come together to, again, see the mutual benefits of having regular meetings about the problem of inspection. Again, interestingly, it was driven by the Dutch inspectors, who, with their allies, the English inspectors, because I think they had a very mutual kind of understanding of what should be happening. In 2011, those 6 associations of inspectors have grown into 29. So today, probably, there's 30, 32, 34 associations of inspectors in Europe who are meeting and working together. It has a very developed system of workshops. It gets European funding to move inspectors around the place. I observed a meeting of Romanian inspectors in a Scottish week of study. This is happening all the time. It's a web of meetings. They're very good at, it's an academy they call it, they're very good at organising these meetings. And also projects. They wanted joint projects of inspectors to evaluate pupils in classrooms. The Dutch would work with the English, and the English would work with the, probably not the Scottish, but others. So they were interested, keen. They had a blue book. If anybody wanted to know about the inspectorates in Europe, you could look at the book. They were a kind of hub. A meeting place of ideas and thoughts about inspection. But interestingly, they were encouraged by a speaker from the Commission in 2001 who said to them, look, we need inspectors. We really need you. we think there's a new frontier opening, which is an interesting metaphor itself, and a new frontier opening in European integration. That inspectors were crucial in this process, that they would help to close the performance gaps between countries, and they would close communication gaps. So they were given a mission, they were given a flag, and they were told, you know, you really can be helpful. Don't just think of yourself meeting and talking. Go for something. And by 2005, it actually said that its work as an association is to help shape the modernization of European education systems. So it moved from an association into taking a kind of a mission for itself and saying we are key to the organizing of the European education. And they asked for inspections across Europe to play a key role in transparency, quality evaluation, and self-evaluation. The particular flag that they wave today is not the flag of the English inspectors, which is to do with data and more data. It's the flag of self-evaluation. That is one of their key ideas for schools, and it's the ideas that translates across now. So you find there's a new association that's forming in Albania. Part of it's kind of Europeanizing thinking. It joins to Siki. The next thing you know is it says, we're really interested in school self-evaluation. This is the modern way, and this is what the inspectors are doing. So what is the pattern? They start these associations talking about cooperation, discussion, the benefits of working together. They want to be friends. They want to be good Europeans. They want to meet and be social. And they've got cheaper travel and they can communicate better, and they're very keen on seeing the possibility now of being in Europe and eating better food. But from 2000, you see them starting to think, how can we engage with the European Union? How can we involve ourselves with what's happening in standardization and the new technological communications? How can we influence the new project on lifelong learning? Should we be thinking about e-learning, benchmarking? So there's a kind of a willing engagement which also structures them. So they're not just thinking about the benefits of meeting, they're thinking about influence. They're embraced, and they're thinking about how can we talk to these reasonable people and influence them. The pace of change grows so rapidly in the last 10 years that the association feel new opportunities and their policy concerns and need better organisation, and they think a lot about this. So Siki, let's start with Siki. It starts to worry that data and large-scale data and PISA is going to eliminate them. That the inspectorates, the idea of the national inspectorates, will actually start to disappear because the power of data is growing so fast. And when I was interviewing the inspector in Flanders, he said that his minister had come down to the unit. It's a small country. The minister had come down to the unit and said, you know, you're so expensive, why do we need you? So their activity together becomes very, very important because they're also embracing, thinking, defending. It's data in particular that threatens the inspectors. That's how they see it. They become very organised, they're very proficient, and they start to collect, they get money, better at collecting money. ERA, on the other hand, it's expert groups of which you could be members, it's an open house, are involved with thinking about infrastructure, policy, innovation, and it becomes very well organised internally, but it just cannot influence, as it feels it should influence, education research as an area inside Europe. In fact, with the problems with the new framework projects, it's not only education, but social science that doesn't appear to be looking for a future with funding. But certainly, it can't influence this. So the understory, finally, the understory. It's working hard, it's working together, it's organised. There's a new architecture of public and private experts that are, I would say, are building a European education through arrays of interlocking standards, by the imaginary that they hold, by their being invited and embraced because it's not political. Of course it is political, but when you talk about benchmarks, you think you've excluded politics, or you want experts. And they feel, this is my impression, there's much more activity, it's much more organised, it's more constructing, and I suppose they are being constructed as well. And I think it is my last one. My point is that you have to really, if you want to look at European education, you have to really look down into or engage with and think about the understories, the dark layers, the rhizome layers. That's the area which the key work is happening in. I don't think it's happening in the Ministers of Education meeting, not really. It's happening where the experts and the professionals are looking into each other, engaging, finding, constructing, developing solutions, arguing, working with private companies. And it's them and their networks that we really have to think about. But if you think it's a conspiracy of others, some of the most active people in this world are the academics. So these are the people you're sitting next to. Okay, so it's not that there's some other group of, I'm trying to think of a neutral word, I really can't, but secret agents for Europe. It's actually people who are trying to influence, engage and work together. Some know they are doing this. Some actually don't know they are doing this. But the fact is, they are together constructing in the understory this new European education space.